Right, I'll kickstart. Maybe we'll have some more people tuning in a little bit later. So, hey everybody, welcome to our first Women in DevOps webinar, how to maintain DevOps best practices remotely. I'm Francesca, the co-founder of Women in DevOps, and I will be chairing our panel discussion this evening. Some of you may have been to our events in the past, and for some of you who might be located outside of London, we are aiming for global domination as we already host our events in California too, but maybe this is your first time actually being able to join us for a panel, so at least we can find a positive out of the current climate. A little bit about Women in DevOps. So we established Women in DevOps in 2017, specifically to address the issue of gender imbalance in the DevOps industry. Our aim is to help close the gender gap by empowering women to create innovative solutions, encourage organizations to retain women into their tech communities, and to promote gender equality. Thank you so much for sharing your evening with us for our live Q&A panel, where we will be understanding how our panelists are currently juggling their working environments, maintaining DevOps best practices, challenges they are currently overcoming, and also the positives to remote working. Before I kind of kick off and kind of start the panel discussion, I want to introduce everybody, but I just have to do a little bit of housekeeping and let everybody know that everybody that is joining the panel as an attendee is muted upon entry. We are trying to make the webinar as engaging as possible, so please do feel free to put any of your questions into the chat box to the right. I might run out of time. Like I said, we have got that clap at 8 p.m. this evening, but I will try to answer questions ask everybody the questions as and when we can. And then the final thing is this is being recorded, so everyone will get to watch this after we've got to the end. So I'd like to now go ahead and introduce our speakers. So I'll start off with Anoushka. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So good evening, everybody. I hope you're all safe and well. My name's Anoushka Streets, and I am the head of platform engineering at Currency Cloud. So Currency Cloud, for those of you who don't know, provides an API-driven cross-border payments platform. So we take the heavy lifting out of paying money across for FX collections and payments across borders. So very highly regulated, and so working within a DevOps framework in that environment is challenging in and of itself without COVID-19 coming along and helping us out. So my team is predominantly looking after building a very opinionated platform that our developers can use to build features and services on that platform. So that's me.
Thanks, Anoushka. Katie, you're up next.
Hello everyone, my name is Gamanji, and I am a cloud platform engineer for American Express. I've been in this role for around 3 months, actually 2 months and a half, so quite a new initiative in my career. But I am part of the team that aims to transform the current platform by embracing the cloud native principles and making the best use of the open source tools. As well, one of my other positions within the open source community is a TOC, or Technical Oversight Committee member. And this means that I am one of the members in the open source community that tries to leverage and enable projects to join the open source community. So quite excited to be here tonight, actually.
We're excited to have you. Steve?
Hello, I'm Steve Alvar. I work at Global. You may not have heard of Global before, but Global has some of the nation's best loved radio brands underneath it. So the likes of LBC, Radio X, Capital, Smooth, Gold, etc. My team specifically within that works to kind of create some of the glue that glues together traditional radio broadcast and some of the kind of the more digital, so like websites and apps, tries to glue those two worlds together. So yeah, we provide a lot of kind of things which sit in the background, make everything work, and tries to connect people with the content that they love. As I think it's around, what, 25 million people a week currently listen to Global's stations at the moment. So we're just trying to deliver people what they want, really. And that's me.
Amazing. And then last but not least, Susie.
Hiya, hi, I'm Susie. I am a senior software engineer at the BBC. Within the BBC, I work in a team called News Labs, and within the team News Labs, I'm on the Gourmet project. The Gourmet project is looking at working with academics doing research into under-resourced languages in terms of machine translation. So the academics are looking into novel ways to improve machine translation with these under-resourced languages, and the BBC's role is to take their research and build prototypes around these models and just try and use them in industry in the BBC's work. So this is a kind of innovation project, kind of R&D type work, so it means that I do a little bit of everything, and as a result I spend quite a lot of time thinking about DevOps things to try and do as little myself and use kind of DevOps practices and those cloud-based services as much as possible.
Brilliant. So whilst I have you, Susie, what DevOps best practices are you grateful for now that you're working remotely?
I mean, I think the really big one that is what is different about the industry now is that just so much stuff does live on AWS or in Google Cloud or on maybe Microsoft Azure. Someone must put stuff there, right? And that just wasn't the case. And I'm sure there are still lots of people with in-house hardware, but just I can't imagine what things would have been like, say, 10 years ago, just because we're not having to think about, oh, we're spinning up a new project. How on earth are we going to get hardware shipped to the right place? There's just so many things that you don't need to think about anymore. So that's the kind of very broad aspect of what has been great about the best practices, is that I'm not trying to physically work with hardware. I think the other things more specifically are around how we deploy things. Since starting to work remote, there's a lot more kind of asynchronous conversation. So you can't just see who's in the office, see who's around and just turn around and talk to people. So the transparency from a good deployment pipeline is key. So you can see who's using what's been deployed, if there's something wrong with your stack, what the problem is, something you just wouldn't get if you didn't have a kind of strong, this is being built here, I can look what's wrong with it, rather than, you know, some mystery script that someone runs. And another thing around that kind of asynchronous communication, I think, has come from our CloudFormation templates. So I don't think anything we're doing is particularly novel or out there, but just having that kind of documentation now that there aren't people you can just ask, and you've not got that one person who's always around that you ask things, has been really important to making sure that we can work remotely and that people aren't blocked on stuff, that they can see what is happening and have that visibility.
Amazing. And does anybody else have any opinions or views about what they're grateful for at the minute?
I think that at the moment, because for me, DevOps is obviously about the technology and about leveraging technology to be more agile and to collaborate better. But when we look at DevOps, for me, the biggest part of it is actually the cultural aspect. And I think, I don't know if you've ever seen the keep calms and do DevOps. So, you know, the kind of culture, automation, lean, measuring, don't forget that one, and then sharing. And if you take the two that bookend that, the kind of culture piece and the sharing piece, the fact that we've kind of built that DevOps culture throughout our organisation from top to bottom, actually. So even the exec who aren't necessarily working within technology kind of understand those DevOps principles. And so the concept of us all sharing information and being super transparent means that by now that we're all remote, that's actually forming a really nice foundation for us to be able to work remotely. So that's how, you know, directly how good DevOps practices that have been kind of crafted, you know, while we've been sat at our desks all in the same office, have actually now started to bear fruit. Now we're not in the office together.
I mean, I guess that takes us on to kind of understanding that's like a benefit that you've mentioned. So are there any kind of DevOps, are there any kind of other positives that you've noticed that have come out of everybody working remotely?
I think for me has been quite amazing to see a big company moving to a remote, completely kind of working culture. So this shift in remote first has been completely extraordinary for me to watch and observe. And I think this doesn't come easily, because as a company, you always have to have a plan B. If this happens, how are we going to recover? How we make sure that our employees have their laptops, and how do we make sure that our product is going to be there? Because nowadays, every single product we look out there, they're going to have some tech involved. And in a way, we can see every single company from a tech perspective, and they always try to be kind of available to the users at all time. And this has been a shift throughout the last years, but I think now we can actually see all these fruits at the moment, because the shift has happened from being in the office to working from home. It only happened within weeks for companies. For example, in our case at Amex, we had employees which were working remotely. We had 15,000 of employees, but we moved to 60,000 employees to work from home within 1 week. And that shift I find completely extraordinary. And we're actually there, our product is still there, we're still available. And yeah, this shift has been something which I really would like to applaud in all the companies, not just Amex.
I think
everyone out there. It's been amazing.
I think to kind of echo that, it's just been amazing to see things that were always thought to be kind of completely impossible, and, you know, meetings or practices that just had to happen face to face, that suddenly when they can't, it completely changes everything when there aren't those kind of, oh no, we do things like this, we couldn't possibly try it another way. It's been amazing when you just have to be like, oh, we can make it work. I work in a team where there's a lot of idea sessions and trying to work out what the next big thing is and coming up with prototypes, and it's always felt like those things are only conversations that could happen face to face, but there is stuff that's totally possible to do completely remotely. And it's been really interesting just to force people to think differently and think about, how do you have meetings when everyone is on Zoom and it's 14 little squares, not people around the table, and how do you make sure you're not interrupting each other, and, you know, you get a moment and your little square goes yellow around the outside but suddenly it goes away. Like, how do you make sure you're still having these back and forth conversations? I think it's also Katie talking about some of her team being remote. I think it's been a really good way to promote people who were in meetings remotely up to kind of the same level as everyone else. I think that it's often the case that if one person, companies will sort of do remote a bit and maybe one person will be on the Zoom call, but everyone will sort of forgotten they're there a little bit, and they'll be trying to say something, but everyone in the room is able to take precedent because you have all those other cues, you're looking at each other. And yeah, it's been, obviously no one ever wants something like this to happen, but when the rules change, it is really interesting to see just what people are capable of. And just, I've been really impressed with how creative and innovative my colleagues have been in trying to do the things they always do, but just having to do them differently because there's no alternative.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think it's really kind of changed people's outlook. Katie, so are there any notable changes in the process structure or team collaboration techniques that you've noticed?
I think some of them were actually mentioned in the previous question, but there is a strong accent on the asynchronous communication, which means you don't have this availability to just walk to someone in the office and be like, can you help me with this one? Or I would like your idea on this topic. This cannot really happen anymore. You have to, well, it can happen in private conversations, but nowadays I think the accent is not about how can you get the work done, but how can you be transparent to the entire team? And I think every single employee or coworker or colleague within a team should do some effort to be as transparent as possible, be to actually have this conversation when it comes to technical side in the team channels rather than in a one-to-one channel. It's all about maybe sending different reactions. The way you communicate is quite different as well. So one of the things I've noticed, there is definitely a emoji heavy, I would say, sometimes communication. There is always the reactions in Slack, which I'm a very big fan of, and I'm trying to use them as much as possible anywhere. I love the Slack emojis, honestly, especially the customized ones. But again, like I've seen some of in terms of the team communication is completely different. And one of the gravitational point for us, which always was the stand up. This is the moment when we actually connect with the team. We all give our updates. But I think there is a more, how can I say, evidence or like emphasis on this particular ritual within a team. So this is pretty much what I've been noticing in the last 3 weeks so far.
And have you kind of noticed any adjustments to prioritizing projects and what the impact of kind of deliverables on projects have been?
I think this is depending on the company. For my team specifically, we didn't deprioritize any projects. We still have to deliver the same thing, but the purpose or the goals changed slightly. Instead of actually, in my team particular, for example, instead of actually building the work and actually come with a product, we'll focus more on the architectural design of different applications. And I think this actually puts us in a position where we have more time to research and come with something which is more solid as a final result rather than just rushing through. And I think this is getting a bit of the pressure we have usually to actually deliver all the time. And this kind of gets us the time to synchronize with the team members, but at the same time synchronize on the ideas, how do we want to deliver our platform. So I think for my team has been quite a nice outcome. But I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and I've been reading lots of news, and it's quite common for big companies or small companies to deprioritize any projects that will not give the customers how can I say, immediate impact. And they pretty much shifted 3 months later on. And this has been quite frequent in different companies. And I think one of the things to notice here is adaptability, not from the company side, but from the employee side, because they have to deal with this maybe abrupt change within their priorities. And I think, again, there's the emphasis on the communication, how this is communicated by the higher ups towards the employee, how they actually can make sure that they take this on board in a very efficient manner has been, again, one of the important things to focus. But yeah, I think there's a different shift in different companies. In my team has been slightly, I would say, with a positive outcome, but yeah, I think it depends a lot.
What about at Global, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, I'd kind of echo some of what you were just saying there, Katie, in that kind of it's more about what the team makes of kind of some of the shifting priorities, because as you say, obviously they're very strange times we're living in, and that can massively affect what the company overall is doing, which obviously then trickles down into what your team is doing. So it's kind of the mindset that the team kind of approaches it with, is rather than being, I don't know, disappointed that you're not going to get involved with a project that was planned, maybe being like, oh, okay, it's good we get the opportunity to do X, Y, and Z over here, or improve that over there, which we've been meaning to do for months, or finally get stuck into that bit of tech debt over there, or something like that. So yeah, there's definitely some of that happening at Global as well.
Brill. And how is everybody dealing with burnouts whilst working remotely? Katie?
Right. I think burnouts are something very easily achievable within this working remotely context. One of the things is it's very difficult to separate between the working and personal life kind of ecosystems, because usually you work within your living room or whatever it's in your house. It's very difficult to make this is the end of the day, I'm not going to work anymore. So the burnouts actually refer to when you get a message, usually you feel prompted to respond as quickly as possible, even if you're having your coffee, for example, or even for example, in your lunch break. And I think this is something which is natural, like you would like to be there and respond. It's kind of an impulse. While it's in the office, if you go for a coffee and you return in 15 minutes and you see the message, that's an acceptable behavior. And I think this is something which has to be communicated on the team level, and maybe something to be transparent about. Maybe not take maybe 5 hours to respond, but a longer time frame, maybe 10 minutes instead of 2 minutes. That's going to be quite an important, and maybe giving this safety net mentally, like you don't feel like you failed your team or anything like that. So I think burnout is something to be very careful of. And I think it's very important to understand, to have this routine, when to start, when it's your lunch break, when to finish, and most importantly, communicate this with the team. If, for example, response time, if there is no incidents, then obviously you can take maybe a longer time to respond. Otherwise, you have to be there, unfortunately. But yeah, I think this balance it's difficult. It's been difficult for me, honestly, and I'm still trying to achieve the right the measures.
How is everybody else kind of finding that balance between juggling things like that?
I think that it's an unusual situation, because it's not even like we're just remotely working, right? We're remotely working. So I saw a tweet somewhere the other day that, yeah, we're not remotely working. We're kind of trying to work during a crisis, and I think for a lot of people, it's not just like, you know, I used to work from home occasionally before all this happened, and it was fine. I'd be at home on my own and I could crack on. But now I'm at home with my daughter and my husband. I'm not sure who's higher maintenance. And it's a different beast. And there's a number of my colleagues who are actually in. I'm pretty good. My daughter's 12, right? So she, you know, give her an iPad and YouTube, and she's sorted. And I'm sure she's doing her schoolwork, right? She's definitely doing that. Hashtag failed mother. But but there are a lot of my colleagues who are actually working with really young families. You know, they've got children that are, you know, I think I've got one of my colleagues who's got 3 kids under the age of 9. And you know, these kids, they need help and support and maintenance. And so having that kind of mindset where you appreciate that folks are just not going to be able to be fully focused 100% of the time on what they're doing during this period, and cutting them some slack, and being at, you know, and actually from a Currency Cloud point of view, I think we're doing a really good job of that, right the way from the exec all the way down. So we have a weekly update, we have like a weekly briefing with our chief exec, who's sat there in his house, and we have other members of the exec team sat there with their kids on their laps, you know, saying, you know, this is okay, you know, it's okay to, you know, not be at 100% right now. And I just think that other things that we've done, like we've introduced mental health days, so now we all get a day off a month to take, and we are actively encouraged to switch everything off. Do not log on, do not do anything. You are not in the business for that day. And even little things like, you know, virtual water cooler type moments, where, you know, we schedule half an hour in the diary to just chat about anything, nothing, but not work. Definitely not work. You know, we have virtual Pictionary. We've got yoga. Someone comes along and do a bit of yoga. So we're actively trying to help people get some headspace, because as Katie was saying, is that we've all got kind of 20-second commutes now. And so that delineation between home and work is very grey, and so that trying really hard to help make it less grey, and to absolutely encourage the people who work for us to take the time and to look after themselves. This will end, right, and we will get back to normal. And I think we were quite worried about you know, a massive drop in productivity. We just haven't seen that, and if anything, I'm now more worried about folks burning out, because our productivity is actually probably as good as it's ever been, and I just want to make sure that our folks are okay, and that's my main concern right now.
I think
Brilliant. Sorry, Susie.
The big challenge right now, and what has been kind of interesting on Teams and kind of managing people is that to stop burnout, so many people need so many different things, because there's such a kind of range of experiences you'll have on your team. So you'll have people who are, so I mean, for example, the only thing I have to keep alive is myself and this plant. And I mean, that's balancing. The coriander in the other room is a little bit iffy, but like both powering through the lockdown. And other people I work with have got small children. However, they might have a garden, whereas I live in a London flat where all I can do is look out the window. And I feel like the thing that's challenging about managing a team right now is that you will have this kind of range of challenges, and what works for one person won't work for someone else. And it's all about finding that balance of what individual members of your team need. So if someone is living in a flat share with 4 other people in London, they're going to need something very different than someone wondering what on earth they're going to do with their 3 horrible teenagers who hate everything and won't get off TikTok. So I think it's just those individual differences, and realizing that everyone's finding different things difficult.
You're telling me you're not doing any TikTok videos at the moment, Susie?
No.
I'm currently
Looking after the plant, it's a full-time job.
Sorry, I forgot about the plan.
I understand it very well. I have a plant as well.
As a plant parent, I'm concerned that it won't get to go back to school for ages.
I shouldn't be too worried about the coriander in the other room, though. It is the devil's herbs.
I agree.
You're one of them.
So moving on to your hit, moving off of your hit of coriander, Steve, and back to more DevOps focused questions. Which tools have you found more useful during this change, and which have kind of been less so?
Sure. So kind of as we've already alluded to, kind of one of the main kind of important bits of working in a DevOpsy kind of way is communication. So obviously the way we communicate has changed massively. So there's tools like, I don't know, Slack and video conferencing like BlueJeans or Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever you're using have now become much more important. And, you know, I've gone from, I never really used Microsoft Teams before, so now I use it most days. Because now I just need to be able to communicate with people in a different way, because we need to keep that communication open to, you know, work effectively and accomplish what we're supposed to be doing. So those are kind of the main things that have been more useful, I think. There are certain things which have been less useful, like there's a TV in the office which has got a Raspberry Pi hooked up to it, which displays all kinds of like dashboards and graphs and useful information, which is great when you're in the office. It's not quite so useful when you're at home, as you can imagine. I imagine there's some fairly perplexed cleaners possibly looking up at it and wondering what exactly it is. So that's kind of got me thinking, you know, what things we got at the moment which are really good for working remotely, and what things aren't quite so useful, like that dashboard thing, and how can I kind of maybe alter those so they're more useful for people who aren't actually there in the office. So that's going to be quite a useful takeaway from all of this for me, I think, actually. Aside from that, there's also other stuff which, as has already been kind of alluded to earlier, things like AWS, which obviously just work anywhere, and I just kind of continue interacting with in exactly the same way because it's just available, which is obviously amazing. That and the work VPN is obviously pretty useful for me able to get to everything there. I've seen some interesting graphs from the networking team about, you know, VPN traffic over the last few weeks, which have gone, as you can imagine. So yeah, that's working reliably is very welcome.
Brilliant. Anybody else got any tools that they're finding more useful in this time?
Being able to pair over VS Code is amazing. Like, I've never particularly used it before. I just heard that like it was pretty good, and now I'm like, this is unbelievable. The fact that you can be looking at someone else's screen and be like, no, this line, and just highlight it is unbelievably useful to keep collaborating rather than, you know, sharing a screen and kind of squinting at their code. But to be able to be actually in there and like see exactly what's happening, I've just been so, like, I haven't particularly used it before, and I'm just so impressed by it.
Brilliant. And then has anything kind of changed in terms of working in a DevOpsy way remotely?
Well, yeah, I guess the main thing, as I said, is communication. So I think one of the key things is to try just keep those lines of communication open between you and people in your team, between you and people in other teams that you may need to kind of deal with on a regular basis. And as mentioned, it's also kind of important to definitely try and avoid that burnout of kind of people being there and like, oh, you must respond within seconds to a Slack message.
Mm.
That's just not normal or healthy. And I've kind of found it really almost good for productivity being at home, because you're less interruptible in that way. You're not just kind of sat in an open plan office, as I imagine probably everyone here is, because that's all the rage nowadays. People just walk up, or you'll walk over to someone, or you get distracted by something that's going on over there, or there's a conversation over there. So kind of keeping that kind of down a little bit with some of those kind of asynchronous communication, that works really well. And yeah, I've also found kind of keeping kind of team cohesion together with kind of, as people have said, like those virtual kind of coffee break things have been absolutely brilliant. And not just within the team, get together with a few people from around the business who you might, interact with otherwise, and just kind of have a catch up occasionally. Just keep those lines of communication open, basically. And also, one thing which we found really good is doing on a Friday afternoon, someone puts together a little bit of a quiz. We all crack open a beer, have a beer together, answer a few questions, have a bit of a laugh, just switch off from work for the moment, and just communicate as humans, really.
Oh.
I think. Sorry, I was just going to say, I think another really important thing is that's kind of super important while everybody's kind of remote like this, is that we're all really clear about what our goals are, and that certainly as a leader within my organisation, it's really important to me that I'm really keen on kind of autonomous teams anyway, but that's kind of, it's easier to do when they're all in one place. When they're spread across the country, I think the fact having really clear vision and goals, so that the folks that are sat at their desk, if they're in any doubt about what they're working on, they can just look at those and go, it's all right, I know I'm doing the right thing because I'm heading towards those. So it means that there's a much less, they're not constantly, is this right, is this okay, is this okay? It's like, I know it's okay because I've been very clearly communicated to about where we're going, and where the train, which station the train's heading to next, and so that's one of the things. And again, that's a culture, that's a communication thing that drives directly out of DevOps kind of best practices, right? And so I find that is something that I'm just having to be really clear about with my teams right now, which I would be clear about even when we weren't remote, but it's super clear now that we're all just everywhere.
And are there kind of some ways that you're making things less painful from a DevOps perspective?
Yeah, I think so. There's what I started doing, I started looking at other organisations that are remote first. So Currency Cloud is not a remote first organisation. We do have people who occasionally work from home, but that's not the same as being a remote first organisation. I think Susie picked up on it when we were talking about just having the one person who's working from home on the call kind of feeling slightly marginalised because of all of the side conversations that happen within that call, and it's things like that remote first companies are really good at kind of cutting out because they have to. But there's a company called Basecamp, and they are and have been for many years remote first. And the founder of Basecamp, a guy called David Hanson, and another chap called Jason Free, wrote a book called Remote, Office Not Required. And I think for the attendees of this meeting, it might be a useful reference if you're interested in remote DevOps or remote working. And there were a few things I picked up from that which have been particularly helpful. And we've already talked a couple of times about asynchronous communication and the fact that actually, you know, the work that we do in software engineering is kind of quite a creative process, really, and a collaborative process. But then trying to break that down into a mechanism that works when you're all in different places. And so you've got a couple of choices. You can have a meeting about it remotely over Zoom, which is, you know, and it's difficult to whiteboard and express ideas on the fly that way. Or, as is suggested in this book that I wrote, that I read, is, I didn't write it, just get that clear. It was the idea that you actually start to write things down instead of have meetings about them. And so now one of the things that we're doing more and more of is actually, so if someone has a proposal, we actually write that down. We write it down almost like a mini business case. It's not War and Peace, but it's a proposal of the value proposition. And then we distribute that, and then each of us asynchronously thinks about that, comments on that, and then we come back. And when we come back to talk about it, we're actually in decision mode, rather than in this kind of, you know, sometimes can get a bit navel-gazy type, you know, discussion mode about what we could or couldn't do. And what I'm finding is actually the quality of decisions is improving, because we're actually taking the right time to reflect and think about what we want to do. And so, you know, if you're in a meeting and someone puts you on the spot, what you know, you're going to come up with whatever the first thing in your head is. Whereas if you read something, have a time to reflect on it, and then respond, you're going to come up with a much better quality response. And it's actually a bit more respectful of people's time, because you can kind of choose when you do that work. Whereas with a meeting, it's like, I'm going to do that work and I'm going to do it, you know, you have to do it within that assigned hour, whereas someone can send you it and you can do it in the morning, and you can do it whenever you want, as long as you've done it, you know, by the time we're all going to get back together again. And to be honest, it's something that we're trialing, and it's working quite well, and it's something that we're going to probably continue doing after this is all done and dusted, because I actually think it's a really good way to help us make decisions, and it cuts down meetings, and everyone hates meetings, right? So let's kill meetings.
Are there any other takeaways that you would take that you would move with into the kind that you switched when it comes from what you weren't doing when you were in the office that you're now doing remotely, and you think you'll carry them back into the office life? I got around that in a very long way. Hopefully got what I meant.
Yeah. Was that to me, or?
Yeah, that was to you, yeah, Anoushka.
Anything else? I think one of the other things I'm really appreciating, actually, so we recognise that the time that you spend at home actually is quite productive, because you don't have all these walk-ups, and Steve mentioned it, you know, all that kind of people talking to you. And so one of the things we've actually done, again, another initiative that we've started at Currency Cloud, is we've started a no meetings day. So Wednesdays now are no meetings days. So we don't book meetings on a Wednesday. So it kind of gives you that headspace and reduces your cognitive load. Because a lot of cognitive load is actually when you're task switching, and it's actually really hard on your brain to go from one thing to the next thing and switching all the time, and it's quite stressful. And so if you can reduce that, even just for a day a week, I think that's really helpful, and I'm certainly finding that that is helping, and I think that that's probably something as well that we'll continue to do even after this has passed us by.
Brilliant. Anybody else got anything that they want to take back into the office?
That is one of the things which I'm hoping that, you know, the world in general takes away from this, is that they realise that there's probably some things which are currently meetings which don't need to be meetings going forward, and then we can just avoid that and just get that time back, and everyone will be happier.
Yeah. How many times do you come out of a meeting and go, that could have been an email?
Oh.
The classic. It's
Well, it's in the end of meetings about how we have too many meetings. We have a meeting to talk about how we should get less meetings.
Yeah.
That's sometimes a classic meeting that's put on.
Yeah.
So moving away from kind of that, looking, because everybody's in a different role across all of the different companies that you work for, in terms of kind of new staff coming into your teams or working alongside them, how are you currently going about onboarding new starters and that whole remote process given the current climate?
Yeah, it's really fascinating actually at the moment. So just before all this kicked off, we had a big recruitment drive. And so we're in the middle of onboarding a lot of new starters. So I think since this happened, we've onboarded 10 new people across the business. So we got quite good at it now. After and I do in the recorded world apologise to the first few who were our remote guinea pigs. But actually, one of the biggest challenges was logistically just getting them their kit. Even with our workers who kind of start within our office, we do a number of kind of remote sessions as it is. So particularly, if we've got offices in Amsterdam, London, and New York, and our head office is in London. And so when we have new starters in Cardiff, already a lot of that onboarding process is kind of remote, right? It's just London people delivering onboarding to people in Cardiff, for example. But the hard bit was actually, how do we actually physically get some hardware to that person safely? Particularly during COVID, where we all use Apple Macs, and the number of Apple Macs that are available is reduced significantly, and all the Mac stores are shut. So we're having to ask all of our people, please don't break them because we can't fix them. So that's been interesting from a logistics point of view, but thankfully we've managed to kind of overcome that and just about keep on top of it. And then, as I said before, we already had a reasonably well-formed onboarding mechanism, which had remote elements, and now it's just all remote. So that means, so I think the biggest challenge now is people do business with people, people work with people, and while we can have these kind of video conversations and see people's faces, it's still, I'm finding the kind of conversations that you have, unless you force it into being about not being about work, it's all very work, right? And so how do you form those relationships with new starters based on, what do you like to do in your spare time? These are people, these are things that make people 3D to us, and we start to understand what motivates them and what their hopes and aspirations and dreams are without getting too wanky about it. But it's really important, right? For me personally, it's really important that I understand what motivates people and what gets them out of bed in the morning. And sometimes you need a bit of colour to do that, which is based on what do they like to do at the weekend? They play guitar, they do, I don't know, they do bird watching, I don't know, but it's kind of it, and that's quite hard to get, and I think that's the biggest challenge that we've got with all our new onboarders. It's just, and that this is going on for at least another 3 weeks, we're told today. So I think that, and there's no easy answer to that. I don't have a magic wand for how to fix that. It's just making sure that we're reaching out, and we are making sure that they're getting enough clarity and arm around the shoulder, virtual arm around the shoulder, and somebody to buddy with them and make sure that they know where they've got somewhere to turn to if they need any help.
Virtual elbow.
Virtual, yeah, elbow bump. Yeah.
How, I know, Susie, that you've recently had somebody join your team, is that right? Am I right?
So I became a line manager for the first time the same week I was told to go home and not come back. So that was a challenge. I would also like to go on camera and apologise for my onboarding process. No, in all seriousness, I think it's another one of those things that you think it can't be done and then it has to be done, so you get on with it. It's very strange, the kind of you know, day-to-day stuff, you kind of get on with it, but then you just find really weird things that are hard. Like, I completely echo that sudden nightmare of being like, how on earth do I give a laptop to someone that I cannot go and see? It suddenly is just something that you never try and solve that problem, because you just go into the office. There's no need to find a solution. And that very strange thing of someone's first day, they turn up to the office, they go to reception, you go and meet them. When it's remote, you just have to email them being like, I'm going to Zoom call you now, your first day is starting. And it's just very strange. Those little kind of social things that normally there's just a way that you do them. And when it's remote, you don't do them like that. And the logistics, the main thing is try not to exhaust someone with Zoom calls. The person who started reporting to me has done a brilliant job of starting a job she did not think would be remote, being fully remote, and spending a lot of time in her first week just looking at me while I tell her things about how everything works. And then, so yeah, the obvious thing there is to try not to overwhelm people with Zoom calls, but then there's all the sort of softer stuff around meeting other members of the team, where you would naturally just, you know, say hello in the morning and then slowly get to know them, have lunch, but it becomes much more forced over Zoom. I will say that one thing I found really nice about my team is I feel like people have never been more open and chatty than when we all went remote. It seemed to really bring down a barrier of, we seem to have quite a sort of professional relationship, or certainly I felt like I did, where I liked them, but I didn't know a lot about them. But when you're suddenly talking to someone who's sat in their kitchen and you are making the effort to have these remote coffees and these remote lunches, I've gotten to know people I work with so much better. And it's really nice to see all the creative ways that people are spending time with their colleagues now that they can't just say good morning to them in the morning. And they've had to kind of get to know them in a different way. So yeah, it's kind of been another thing where it's been weird, but hopefully positive, and showing another aspect that you think can't be remote that can be remote, just you need to get a little bit creative.
Brilliant. Anybody else want to add anything to that? Steve, how you're going about onboarding at the moment?
Well, we're very much putting someone through the kind of the trial stages of our remote onboarding process at the moment. So the jury's probably out on how that's going at the moment, because it literally started on Tuesday. So it's like, what, third day now? Yeah, third day. But yeah, it's like Susie was saying, trying to find that balance between, you know, all of these kind of remote video conferencing calls and other things like, you know, conference documentation or whatever kind of things that you can kind of try and bring them up to speed and get to know them, and just kind of try and bring them as best as you possibly can, really. Yeah, it's difficult, but we're trying it.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from all of this is just for everybody, whatever industry you're in, it's just a massive learning curve, and hopefully it is bringing everybody together. So I can see a few questions. I'm not going to lie, I've not really worked out how to see all of the questions, as some people have been messaging me the questions across. So have a couple from our attendees. So on the point of kind of how people are getting to know each other, SAP, I can see that somebody said that they are doing late night drinks too. People who don't ordinarily come out for drinks are now coming for drinks, so they're quite happy about that. I can see that this one, there's a question for you, Susie, around somebody has asked what code review tool it was that you mentioned earlier, and if you didn't mind sharing what that was.
So it was with VS Code, and it's the live share extension.
Okay, brilliant. Hopefully that person is still listening to us.
Have I got one I could answer? Thank you.
There is another question for you. I was going to save it till the end because you're going to like this question. People are wanting to know where you bought your chair from, Susie.
This was bespoke, tailored to fit me. No. So this is a chair from Argos, which I bought after I sat on one of our kitchen chairs for a couple of days. My one feedback while we're doing like chair reviews is that I am not particularly short, so I'm just over 5'7". I have to sit on a cushion to be the right height in it. Like, it's designed for a very tall person. So
for me then.
if you're short, also buy a cushion, because like when I'm not on this cushion, I look like a child sat in it.
How many cushions are you sitting on, Susie?
Just the one.
There are some other questions coming through. I think from Suze. How are you doing things like accessibility testing as part of the pipeline now? Are you still doing the manual testing as well as the generic automated ones? I don't know who that's directed at, so if anybody wants to take the floor on that one.
Oh,
Katie, maybe?
I'm just
I'll
reading.
pick on somebody.
Yeah, sure. I was actually thinking about this one because testing the projects and the new features is quite important. But I think what I can mention, it's in my previous job, we had one of our colleagues working remotely at all times. And we usually, well, he was based in Portugal, and anything we'd like to test, for example, this URL or this application, if it's displaying, we just ask him to test it from Portugal, because there is the VPN on top of it, and there's a bunch of other stuff and configuration on the machine. But I think that has been a natural process. Like, yeah, I think this is always, we need to think about either if you're deploying a new feature, how you're going to test it. And this includes something testing it in a manual environment as well as in an automated environment, or somewhere is like staging and production. Well, production in a way is testing as well. You never know if your application is running up to the point to test it in production. So I think this has, I mean, from my side, I haven't seen a lot of changes towards that specific like testing phase. But again, maybe other attendees had a different experience. From my side, it's been always kind of, we did it previously, we kind of do it now as well. It's a natural kind of organic way of deploying things.
Yeah, I think from an accessibility point of view, Currency Cloud is lucky in that we're an API company. So while we do have a white label website, accessibility is an important aspect, but the elements of it that we care about and our customers care about, we do manage to test through an automated way through our pipeline, and that hasn't changed just because we're remote. It's exactly the same. We use tooling to do that. And all of the kind of functional and non-functional testing still remains fully automated via our pipelines. So. Which are all in the cloud and highly available. So this is not a problem for us, thankfully, at the moment.
Yeah, I'd echo that. It's kind of business as usual for us as well. A lot of the kind of the tools that we make are kind of internal facing tools rather than external facing. So from a manual testing perspective, it's just, you know, you've got a VPN layered on top of it, but that doesn't really change very much, to be honest with you. And yeah, like you say, for the external API facing stuff, it's very much business as usual.
Yep.
Well, so there's a couple more questions. So how can, this is less technical, how can we encourage participation in video meetings for the next 3 weeks when we aren't in front of people, and how can we encourage everyone's voices to be heard?
I think that's such a good question, and it's really, really important, and it actually resonates with me quite a lot, because I've got different kind of characters in my team, some of whom are really noisy, and some of whom
ask if anybody's listening, they'll know it's me.
And some of whom are a lot less vocal in meetings. And although I know for a fact they've got an opinion, right? They're kind of quite opinion holders, and often their opinion is really, really, really good, and I really want to hear it. And so it's a case of it's just a bit of discipline, right, and shutting up and actually trying to provide space for those people to get their voices heard. And actually what we're finding as well is this, we talked about this asynchronous kind of memo format. These people respond in that format, right? It's like they're not in a meeting, and they might actually respond just to me. They might not, so we might have a document that we're sharing and collaborating on, or they might say, I've read this and this is my opinion. They might just email that to me, and that's cool as well. I think that kind of approach does kind of lean towards a slightly more cognitively diverse kind of acceptance of everybody and of different people's preferences around how they like to communicate. So yeah, it's about just kind of shutting up and getting out of people's way, and asking them if they'd like to contribute without making them feel that they have to contribute as well. Because sometimes I've been in meetings where someone says, Dan, what do you think? And maybe Dan doesn't want to talk and actually feels slightly threatened by that approach. So you just have to be a bit more careful about that. And again, kind of understanding how people operate and what their preferences are is really important, which is why with new people who are joining us during this period, it's going to be quite interesting to see how we do that, because I don't know their preferences and it's really hard for me to find out.
And I think this is one of the final questions of the evening. This is going back to kind of that virtual onboarding, and it's looking at what has been the biggest leadership challenge that you may have found, and how can you onboard people remotely to check for the quality of work?
So is that I don't know if I can clarify the question. Is that about when we onboard people, when we actually select people to work for us via the interview process, or is that checking their work quality when they're new and they've been onboarded?
I think we could go down both, or maybe when they're new and we're onboarding them. Maybe that's probably the harder one to figure out.
Well, I think obviously we're in really early days, right? So whoever we've onboarded in this remote, crazy world will have only been with us for a matter of weeks, right? And what we're trying to do is to get to a position where we're buddying with people, we're pairing with our new starters and understanding how they're able to make a contribution. I think as well, we need to just, there's got to be some realism in that. Normally we'd have new starters and they'd become fairly productive relatively quickly. I think it's okay to take the brakes off that a little bit in this situation, and kind of allow for maybe a slightly slower onboarding process and a slower ramp up to full productivity. But it's again, it's just about being realistic about goals, setting clear goals and looking for clear outcomes, and making sure that people understand what those outcomes are, and then just staying in touch. For me, anyway. I don't know about what everyone else thinks.
I feel like one of the techniques that I would like to mention is pairing. I feel like, especially when you have a new employee or a new colleague, pairing with someone in the team, it can be so helpful, not just because from a technical perspective you have someone who has the context and can clarify things. You actually have that human element as well. You're actually talking to someone. You feel, we were mentioning the virtual hug or the virtual elbow. There is someone there, and you always have a person of contact. And I think it has never been more important nowadays to have this mentor, not necessarily mentor, but like person like mentor in the team, to have someone, a go-to person, because for example your manager might have other, like, can be in the meetings, they can have other priorities, like it's always difficult to share the time, especially in a more leader-based position. So having that designed or designated actually colleague or mentor and pairing, I think it cannot be overestimated at any time. I think it's a great technique to get up to speed with many projects. It's a great technique to share ideas, to discuss ideas, and it's a very great enabler for decision making. You feel more empowered to actually talk with people. So just having that element, I think it's a good kind of enabler in any onboarding experiences, remote or in the office.
Yeah, I think probably the measurements of like how well someone's doing probably shouldn't really change particularly just because they're working remotely. As Anoushka said, probably you might want to be a bit understanding about some of the timescales and getting up to speed because, you know, things aren't quite working as well as they could in that respect. But yeah, generally the measurement should be pretty much the same anyway, and you should probably have some techniques and what have you already there to do that.
Yeah, brilliant. There is one final question that has just come through to me, which I think is quite an important one given everything that's going on in the world. And somebody would like to know how you are handling mental health balance during this tough time and keeping morale up. So of course they kind of understand that sometimes there's all this yoga, there's all of this like Zumba and creating a routine, but are there any ways that each one of you are trying to boost morale, whether it's for yourself, your team members, your colleagues?
Yeah, I think when this started, I was rubbish. And so I was just kind of, you know, coming down, doing my work, and then finding it actually really hard to switch off. And I definitely think that I was becoming a little bit overwhelmed by it all, if I'm being completely honest. With the support of my boss and the exec leadership team, who've given such a good example, you know, it's okay for us to just, you know, cut off, and we can actually say now in Slack that I'm going away, I'm not going to be available for the next hour. It's like I'm having you know, just don't bother contacting me because I'm basically away. It's like I'm going for my lunch, and I'm encouraging my team to take proper lunch breaks, you know, have time. Please don't want people to work at all. And actually this Easter has been great, this 4-day break. Even though we've been trapped in the house, was genuinely a really nice break from work, because I think sometimes a weekend is 2 days isn't, you know, you spend 1 day ramping down and then the next day kind of getting ready to go back again, whereas at least you have the 4 days and it's kind of you feel like you properly switch off. And I think everybody's come back after that feeling quite refreshed, and I think that's where the you know, these things like the mental health days are so powerful really, but also just, you know, with me and my team, just being really, really flexible. So, you know, we're no longer in this kind of 9 to 5:30 mold anymore. It's kind of work the hours that suit you, that suit your family, that suit when you can work, or, you know, suit not even your family, your circumstances. If you want to work really early and then finish and have the afternoon and go and chill in the garden, I'm sweet with that. You do that. You know, in this time, just do whatever you need to do to keep yourself healthy, right?
I think it's really important to be willing to be very honest and also potentially quite vulnerable, and I think that is something that's hard, but there's not many people, I think, at the moment who are like, oh yeah, this is totally fine, I never feel miserable, I never think about how much I miss going outside, I never get, you know, overwhelmed about the enormity and situation and everything that's going wrong. Like, I had a stage where every morning I was like, before I even got out of bed, I've read the news for like half an hour, and how am I supposed to start the day?
Read the news.
Don't read the news.
But I think
Stop reading the news.
But I think it is really important that when you are having that kind of feelings of being miserable or overwhelmed or scared, that you are honest with other members of your team, because I think it's really hard if you're feeling that, but the person in charge of your team is trying to present this front of like strength and carrying on. That's almost less helpful. Like, you don't want them to be kind of on a Zoom call weeping, but it is nice to see them saying this is hard, rather than being like, oh well, they're coping and they're turning up and they're being jolly. It's nice sometimes to see someone being like, I'm going to take a half day because I'm overwhelmed today, like I can't focus on anything. And I think that is something that is one of the scariest things to do when you're supposed to be leading, to be like, things are hard, but I think that is a really good example to set of finding things difficult and doing things to look after yourself.
I did it the other week. I popped a message on Slack saying, I'm done. I'm cooked. I'm having the afternoon off. Have a nice afternoon, folks.
Yeah, we actually had there's a really good post that one of my colleagues put up. She has kind of years of experience of working remotely, and she had this kind of whole list of things of like, this is how I managed working remotely over those years, and this is what worked for me. And it was kind of like a whole list of things around like sticking to a routine, and, you know, not just rolling out of bed in your pajamas and, you know, sticking the laptop on and starting working. Like, keep to your routine, you know, get up, have your shower. If you put some makeup on, put some makeup on. If you shave. If you, you know, just keep doing what you would normally do, and then try and keep that demarcation between work and home in whatever way you can. So, you know, if you're lucky enough to have the space to have a room that you can dedicate to work, brilliant, dedicate to that to work. And then at the end of the day, you can literally walk out of that room, and that's kind of your commute home, and you kind of like, you checked out, you're no longer in work mode. And similarly, when you go in the morning, you know, that's it. Oh, right, I'm here now. This is work now. So yeah, I think that's really important. And from a personal perspective, actually, through, you know, not being able to go out and do very much, just kind of doing some kind of exercise routine has been actually really helpful, just to keep some semblance of sanity. That's been probably my personal top tip.
Couch to 5k for the win.
Oh, I'm doing that as well. Love it.
I am so slow.
I am slightly worried that I'm never going to make it to that 5k mark. Well, I think that kind of finishes everything off. I just want to say a huge thank you to our panelists and everybody that's joined us this evening. Given the current climate, I am pleased to let you know that, unlike our physical events, we will be hosting these webinars between myself and Lauren Langdell. We will be taking turns to host these bi-weekly. So the next one will be on the 30th of April at 8 p.m. So this is a little bit later than the one that we have done this evening, as we will have a couple of panelists joining us from the US as well as our European panelists. Like I said at the beginning of this webinar, we want our community to empower, inspire and diversify the DevOps and tech community globally. And anything kind of, if you just want to have a chat and you need some support in this current climate, like, you can reach out to myself. Lauren's obviously not on the video, but I can see that she is listening to us. So, you know, both of us are here. But you can follow all of our upcoming events on www.womenindevops.com. But for now, stay safe, stay home, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.